Your soulmate is about to ask you something important, be ready. Open this now. Something quietly shifted the moment they looked down at their phone, then stopped before pressing send. Their thumb hovered over the screen. Their breathing slowed. It wasn't because they had forgotten what they wanted to say. It was because the question they were about to ask could change everything between the two of you. They read your name again, smiled without realizing it, then erased the first message they had written. It wasn't enough. They wanted every single word to feel right. And that hesitation, that tiny pause, became the beginning of a story neither of you expected. Picture an ordinary evening that suddenly feels different for reasons you can't explain. The sky fades into soft shades of gold, conversations become distant background noise, and somewhere, someone who has been carrying the same thought for days finally decides they can't carry it alone anymore. They replay every memory connected to you like scenes from a favorite movie. The first laugh. The unexpected conversation that stayed in their mind longer than it should have. The moment they realized your presence had quietly become part of their everyday thoughts. Yet one question keeps returning no matter how many times they try to ignore it. What if they finally ask, and everything changes? Stay close, because the next choice they make reveals something they never planned to admit. The silence surrounding them isn't empty anymore. It's filled with anticipation, hope, and a future they are only beginning to imagine. As the night moves forward, they find themselves walking without a destination, letting familiar streets guide them while their thoughts race ahead. Every passing window reflects someone who looks calm on the outside but is rehearsing countless possibilities inside their mind. They imagine your reaction. Would you smile? Would you pause before answering? Would your eyes reveal something your words never could? That uncertainty should have convinced them to stay quiet, yet it has the opposite effect. It reminds them that some opportunities disappear forever if they aren't brave enough to reach for them. Then something unexpected happens. A small coincidence, a familiar song playing from a nearby cafe, a stranger laughing at just the right moment, a breeze carrying a memory they thought had faded, makes them believe this isn't just another ordinary day. There's one tiny detail hidden inside this moment that almost everyone would overlook, but once you notice it, the entire story begins to make sense. The question forming in their heart is no longer about fear. It's becoming about possibility. Just before they finally gather enough courage, they stop one last time. Not because they're uncertain about you, but because they understand the weight of what they're about to ask. Some questions don't simply seek an answer. They invite two lives to step into a completely different chapter. They close their eyes for a brief second and imagine what tomorrow could look like if you both chose the same direction. They picture conversations that haven't happened yet, places you haven't visited together, quiet moments that haven't even been created. Suddenly, the future doesn't feel distant anymore. It feels surprisingly close. But before they send that message or speak those carefully chosen words, one final realization changes their expression completely. They discover that the answer they've been hoping for may have been quietly waiting all along, and the next moment will reveal why this important question couldn't stay hidden any longer. The glow from the screen reflected in their eyes as they typed the question one more time, then paused before sending it. Not because they were afraid of rejection anymore, but because they wanted this single moment to honor everything that had quietly grown between you. They realized that rushing would only steal the beauty from something that deserved patience. Every conversation you had ever shared suddenly carried a new meaning. The jokes that once seemed ordinary now felt like hidden clues. The thoughtful pauses, the unexpected encouragement, the way you always seemed to appear when they needed a reason to smile, all of it had been leading here without either of you fully recognizing it. They even caught themselves laughing at how many signs they had overlooked. "How did I not see this sooner?" they whispered with a smile that no one else was there to witness. Then they made one final promise to themselves: no more pretending these feelings could simply disappear. If the right future was waiting, it deserved honesty. And just as they reached for the send button, another unexpected thought stopped them for one heartbeat. There was one tiny detail about you that made this question far more meaningful than anyone could imagine. Stay with this, because that hidden detail changes everything that follows. And if this story is pulling you in, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Feel free to share your thoughts below and subscribe if you enjoy stories that unfold one surprising moment at a time. Meanwhile, completely unaware of the storm of emotions building on the other side, your own day seemed perfectly ordinary. The familiar rhythm of life continued, yet little moments began standing out in unusual ways. A smile from a stranger felt warmer. A favorite song played unexpectedly. A memory surfaced without warning and refused to leave. These weren't dramatic events, but together they created the strange feeling that something important was moving quietly beneath the surface. At the very same time, your soulmate found themselves replaying an imaginary conversation again and again. They practiced different openings, different smiles, even different tones of voice. None of them felt perfect because perfection wasn't what they truly wanted anymore. They wanted authenticity. They wanted you to hear the truth exactly as it existed in their heart. Then another realization arrived like the final missing piece of a puzzle. The question they planned to ask wasn't really about getting an answer, it was about giving you the opportunity to see what had been growing inside them all this time. That realization brought an unexpected calm. Their nervousness softened into quiet confidence. The next few minutes suddenly felt more significant than the last several months combined, and every passing second seemed to bring them one step closer to a moment neither of you would ever forget. Just when everything appeared ready, life offered one final surprise. A brief interruption delayed them again, not enough to change their decision, but enough to deepen its meaning. Instead of feeling frustrated, they used those unexpected extra moments to think about the future in greater detail. They imagined celebrating small victories together, supporting one another through uncertain seasons, laughing over stories that hadn't happened yet, and looking back at this very evening as the moment everything truly began. The question in their hearts slowly transformed from something uncertain into something beautifully inevitable. They weren't asking because they needed reassurance anymore. They were asking because they believed the connection between you deserved to become something real instead of remaining an unspoken possibility. Their heartbeat steadied. Their smile returned. Their hand finally stopped shaking. Then they looked at your name one last time and quietly said, "It's time." But just before those carefully chosen words reached you, something completely unexpected appeared that neither of you had planned for. And what it revealed would make the question even more meaningful than either of you could have imagined. A quiet breeze slipped through the open window just as they took a slow breath and looked at your name again. It felt as though time itself had decided to wait with them for one final moment. They weren't searching for perfect words anymore, they were searching for the truest ones. Suddenly, an old conversation came back with incredible clarity. You had once said that the most meaningful moments in life are rarely the loudest. They arrive softly, almost unnoticed, until you realize they changed everything. That memory settled every remaining doubt inside them. They smiled, not because they knew what your answer would be, but because they finally understood why this question mattered so deeply. It wasn't about forcing a future. It was about opening the door to one. Their heart no longer raced with uncertainty. Instead, it carried a calm confidence that only appears when someone chooses honesty over fear. But just as they were ready to let those words leave their heart, another unexpected detail caught their attention. There was something you had done recently, something you probably considered ordinary, that convinced them even more that this moment couldn't be delayed. Don't look away now, because that simple detail became the reason they believed the timing was finally right. Miles away, your day continued with its familiar rhythm, yet the atmosphere around you seemed to carry a strange sense of anticipation. You couldn't explain why certain memories surfaced so vividly or why your thoughts kept drifting toward possibilities you had never fully explored before. It was almost as if an invisible thread was gently pulling two separate journeys toward the same destination. At that exact moment, your soulmate imagined the conversation unfolding in countless ways. They pictured your smile before they pictured your words. They imagined the comfortable silence that often speaks louder than long speeches. They even imagined laughing together afterward, realizing that both of you had been carrying similar feelings without finding the courage to say them aloud. Then another realization quietly changed everything. The important question they wanted to ask wasn't meant to create pressure, it was meant to create clarity. They wanted both of you to step out of uncertainty and into something honest, no matter where that path eventually led. That thought brought them unexpected peace. Every hesitation that had followed them for days began to disappear, replaced by excitement for a future that suddenly felt much closer than it had only hours before. And yet, one final piece of the story was still missing, hidden in a place neither of you had thought to look. As evening settled into night, the world around them became wonderfully quiet. The noise of the day faded until only one decision remained. They looked up at the stars, then back at the message waiting on the screen. Every word now felt exactly as it should, simple, sincere, and impossible to misunderstand. They realized that life rarely announces its biggest turning points with dramatic fanfare. Sometimes everything changes because someone finally chooses courage over comfort. Their finger slowly moved toward the send button, their heart steady, their mind clear, their future no longer clouded by unanswered questions. Then, in the final second before that message could leave their phone, another notification unexpectedly appeared. It wasn't random. It wasn't distracting. It was the one thing that made them pause with a smile so genuine that they almost laughed out loud. Somehow, without planning it, you had given them one last sign they had been hoping for. That tiny surprise erased every remaining doubt. Now the question was no longer if they would ask, it had become how soon they could place that life-changing question in front of you. And what they decided in the very next moment would make this story take a direction neither of you saw coming. The next moment arrived so quietly that anyone watching from the outside would have missed it completely. They unlocked their phone, looked at the message one final time, and instead of adding more words, they began removing them. Sentence after sentence disappeared until only the most honest thoughts remained. It suddenly became clear that the question they wanted to ask didn't need to sound impressive. It only needed to sound real. They smiled to themselves, realizing that authenticity carries a kind of strength that polished speeches never can. Then they stood up, took a slow walk outside, and noticed the ordinary world carrying on around them, neighbors talking, lights glowing through windows, cars passing by, people chasing their own stories. Yet somehow, everything felt different because they knew their own story was standing at the edge of a brand new chapter. There was one final feeling they couldn't ignore anymore. They didn't want another day to pass wondering what might have happened if they had simply been brave enough to ask. Stay with this, because the next decision reveals why this moment became unforgettable. And if this journey has kept you wondering what comes next, consider sharing your thoughts below and subscribing for more stories that unfold one meaningful moment at a time. Without realizing it, you also began noticing little changes around you. Familiar places felt warmer. Conversations lingered in your mind longer than usual. Even the quiet moments carried a sense that something meaningful was approaching. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, like the feeling just before sunrise when the sky hasn't changed yet, but you know the light is on its way. At that exact time, your soulmate imagined the question being answered in dozens of different ways, but one image kept returning above all the others. They imagined the relief that would come from finally speaking the truth instead of carrying it alone. That picture gave them all the courage they needed. They no longer cared about creating the perfect moment because they realized the perfect moment isn't found, it is created by sincerity. Then an unexpected smile crossed their face as they remembered something you once said without even realizing its importance. You had mentioned that life's greatest opportunities often arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary conversations. Those words echoed in their heart, and suddenly they understood that this wasn't just another conversation waiting to happen. It was the beginning of a completely different future, one built on openness instead of unanswered questions. But before they could take that final step, one small surprise appeared that made the timing feel even more remarkable. Their phone lit up once again, not with the answer they had been waiting for, but with something that felt almost symbolic. A memory photo appeared from months ago, capturing a simple moment they had nearly forgotten. Looking at it, they realized how much had changed without either of you noticing. The person who once hid behind uncertainty had slowly become someone ready to choose courage. They laughed softly, shook their head, and whispered, "I think this is it." There were no more rehearsals. No more second-guessing. No more waiting for everything to feel perfect. They understood that some questions are meant to be asked before certainty arrives because the answer itself is what creates the certainty. Their hand moved with calm confidence, and the distance between hesitation and action finally disappeared. Somewhere, at almost the very same moment, you felt an unexpected urge to check your phone, as if your heart had quietly sensed that something important was on its way. You had no idea that within moments, the message you were about to receive would begin with a single heartfelt question, a question capable of opening a chapter neither of you had dared to imagine until now. The screen glowed softly as the message finally appeared, but before you opened it, there was an almost unexplainable pause. It wasn't hesitation. It was the kind of silence that exists just before something unforgettable begins. Your soulmate stared at the tiny, delivered notification, then set the phone down and smiled in a way they hadn't smiled in a very long time. The hardest part was over. The question was no longer trapped inside their thoughts, it was finally finding its way to you. They didn't know where you were or what you were doing in that exact moment, yet somehow they felt connected to you more deeply than ever before. Every possibility they had imagined over the past several days suddenly faded into the background. There was nothing left to rehearse, nothing left to rewrite. Only hope remained. They realized that courage isn't about knowing how a story ends. Courage is choosing to begin the next chapter anyway. But there was one thing they hadn't expected. The moment after sending the message felt even more emotional than the hours leading up to it. They found themselves wondering whether you had already seen it, whether your eyes had paused on the first sentence, and whether your heart could already sense the importance behind those carefully chosen words. Stay with this, because the next few moments reveal why this question carried far more meaning than anyone on the outside could have guessed. When you finally reached for your phone, something about the message immediately felt different. It wasn't because of dramatic language or grand promises. It was because every word carried a quiet sincerity that couldn't be faked. Before even reaching the question itself, you could almost feel the care with which it had been written. There were no games. No hidden intentions. Just an honest invitation to step into a conversation that had been waiting for the right moment. As you continued reading, memories began returning one after another, connecting like pieces of a picture that had never seemed complete until now. You remembered unexpected smiles, meaningful glances, conversations that lasted longer than either of you planned, and those rare moments when silence somehow felt more comfortable than words. Suddenly, the question at the center of the message no longer felt unexpected. In many ways, it felt like something your hearts had been quietly preparing for all along. Yet just before you reached the final line, another detail caught your attention. Your soulmate had included something deeply personal, not to impress you, but to show complete honesty. That single detail transformed the message from a simple question into a genuine invitation to build something meaningful together. And in that instant, you realized this wasn't merely about today. It was about every tomorrow that could follow if both of you were willing to take one small step forward. Far away, your soulmate waited patiently, resisting every temptation to check the phone again every few seconds. They reminded themselves that meaningful answers deserve space. They looked out the window as evening settled into a peaceful calm, realizing that whatever happened next, they had already accomplished something important. They had chosen authenticity over uncertainty. That realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. Then, almost at the exact moment they least expected it, the screen lit up once again. A new notification appeared. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. But the very first words instantly brought a smile that reached their eyes. Their heartbeat quickened, not from anxiety this time, but from excitement about everything that might come next. The story that had begun with one unanswered question was quietly transforming into the beginning of a shared conversation, one filled with curiosity, trust, and possibilities neither of you had fully imagined. And as that conversation unfolded, one final surprise slowly emerged. There was another important question waiting just beyond the first one. A question that would reveal how deeply your soulmate had been dreaming about a future with you, and why they believed this was only the beginning of something truly unforgettable.